Greetings, everyone. I'm hoping that you are well and your families are healthy. Today, we're going to discuss you don't know what you don't know. Do you ever look at a person and have a snap judgment? Do you ever wonder what about them is good or bad and why you feel the way you feel? And then where did that come from, or why do I view them like that? Well, today we're going to ask ourselves why we do what we do, why we judge, how we come to snap judgments and react without gathering all the necessary information. Oh yeah, today we're going to talk about biases. And yes, we all have them. Our brains are wired to recognize patterns and make generalizations. Often, biases are judgments and decision-making. There are situations. These unconscious biases are normal, necessary, and a healthy aspect of our cognitive ability. Yet there are times when biases can cause us to act and react in ways that truly undermine who we are. Most notable are unconscious biases that cause us to make assumptions about a person or a situation due to an aspect of their identity. You may have already guessed we will be discussing what is implicit bias, explicit bias, and microaggressions. And you may already know the definitions. Well, let's briefly review them again. What is implicit bias? Well, we already know when we hear the term bias. It's an inclination or preference, especially one that interferes with impartial judgment, sometimes also equivalent to being prejudice. Implicit bias is known as implicit social cognition and unconscious bias. Stereotypes about certain groups of people or individuals form outside of their own conscious awareness. Everyone holds unconscious beliefs about various social and identity groups, and these biases stem from one's tendency to organize social worlds by categorization. Implicit bias influences how we act in a subconscious way, even if we renounce any type of prejudice or stereotypes in our daily lives. The Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Ohio State University explains these biases are favorable and unfavorable assessments deep in our subconscious, and we tend to favor our own in-group, which is a social group to which we psychologically identify belonging to. The implicit associations we harbor in our subconscious cause us to have feelings and attitudes about other people based on characteristics such as one's age, disability, and for some, one's ability, education or lack of education, English language proficiency and fluency, ethnicity, their national origin, physical health status, mental health status, diagnosis or diseases, obesity, being too thin, poverty, affluence, race, religion, one's socioeconomic status, the LGBTQIA, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, skin tone, diverse families, same-sex families, substance abuse, substance use, and you may be able to think of a couple that I have not mentioned. We learn biases as toddlers, as early as the age of 3. Children pick up terms of racial prejudice without really understanding their significance. Early in life, most children acquire a full set of biases that can be observed in verbal slurs, ethnic jokes, and acts of discrimination. And these associations develop over the course of a lifetime and are usually validated through exposure to media, social sites, news programming, and also origins of implicit associations. Then we have conscious bias, or what's called explicit bias. It refers to the attitude and beliefs that we have about a person or a group or a conscious level. Much of the time, these biases and their expressions arise as a direct result of a perceived threat. When people feel threatened, They are more likely to draw group boundaries to distinguish themselves from others. Explicit bias or conscious bias is intentional and responsive. Cultural conditioning. Cultural conditioning encompasses your worldview, the way you think, how you speak, the way you act, our traditions, religious beliefs, what you consider right and wrong, and what you eat and how you dress. Microaggressions. Daryl Wing-Soo states, microaggressions really are reflections of worldviews, our views on inclusion, exclusion, superiority, and inferiority. There are 3 categories of racial microaggressions. That includes microassault. Those are verbal or nonverbal attacks meant to hurt the intended victim through name calling, avoidant behavior, or purposeful discriminatory actions. For an example, someone wearing a shirt or something on the front of their clothes that states something that's offensive to intentionally cause hurt or harm to another person's race or their ethnicity. Microinsult is insensitive communication that demeans someone's racial identity, signaling to people of color that their contributions are unimportant. Example, a teacher corrects the grammar only of Latina children. Microinvalidation, negating or ignoring the psychological thoughts, feelings, experiential reality of a person of color. An example, an Asian American student born in the United States is asked, "Where were you born?" which conveys the message that she is not an American. A few more examples. Failing to learn to pronounce or continue to mispronounce the names of students after they have corrected you. Setting lower expectations for students from particular groups or neighborhoods. Targeting or singling students out based on gender, class, race, or ethnicity. Using phrases such as, "Wow, you speak really good English to be, ... Or, you're kind of cute to be, ... We need to know our microaggressions communicate a clear message. They communicate exactly what we want to say. A few key characteristics of biases. Implicit biases are pervasive. Everyone possesses them, even people with an admitted commitment to impartiality. Implicit and explicit biases are related, but yet distinct mental constructs. They are not mutually exclusive and may even reinforce each other. The implicit associations we hold do not necessarily align with our declared beliefs or even reflect stances we would explicitly endorse. We generally tend to hold implicit bias that favor our own in-group. Implicit biases are easily influenced. Our brains are incredibly complex, and the implicit associations that we have formed can be gradually unlearned through a variety of de-biasing techniques. That's good to know. There's a term in diversity and inclusion, and it is refensing. It's exception making. It's a cognitive process for protecting stereotypes by explaining any evidence or example to the contrary as an isolated exception. For instance, we may hold a belief against a race of people, and we may meet one that contradicts our belief. He or she falls into the category of refensing. Say, for instance, if we have a bias or we have a construct against Caucasian men over the age of 60. And we seem to think that maybe they're very well off and they have a set mindset. And we may meet one who is still working, who is still middle class and very open-minded. And we're like, you're different than what I expected from this group of people. What can be done about it? As we start forming our biases at an early age, it is important that we reinforce norms in our homes. A couple of things we should keep in mind. It is not always about race. It affects gender and ability. It is virtually impossible to act on feelings, attitudes, and behaviors that are outside of one's conscious awareness until they are brought into awareness. Trying to ignore these differences only tend to make discrimination worse. We need to acknowledge we have vision and see age and see gender and see skin color. Our associations about these categories, that's culture. We humans use these associations to make judgments, and that becomes habit, something you can engage in without even knowing it. Because biases are outside our awareness, they can indeed be denied. In the book, Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People, they state by Freud, Freud stuck a dagger in the comforting idea of complete consciousness, self-awareness, but experimental findings suggest that not only do we not know ourselves, if we did, we might not even like ourselves, nor invite ourselves over for dinner. How are our biases reinforced? Once learned, stereotypes and biases resist change, even when there's evidence failing to support the points or something to the contrary. People will embrace anecdotes that reinforce their biases, but disregard experience that contradicts them. Bias is perpetuated by conformity within group attitudes and socialization by the culture at large. Amidst the controversy, it is important to remember that implicit bias is real and it matters. When is the last time a stereotype popped up in your mind? It happens all the time. It could be when you're driving and someone cuts you off in traffic, or when you're in the grocery store. And like now, everybody's saying that there's a shortage on household products, on toilet paper. So if you're in the grocery store and someone may have too many packages of today's sought after toilet paper, we view them as hoarders. Do we know? Do we stop to ask ourselves, maybe they're purchasing for a group home or for members of different households or for their church to give away as, giveaways and to stock people's homes? We don't know, we just automatically assume. Does that make you biased? No. It just means your brain is working properly, noticing patterns and making generalizations. But the same thoughts that process that make people smart can also make them biased. Our perceived bias have an adverse effect on our approach with students and their families. Bias remains as mental residue in most of us. It stays there. Studies show people can deliberately work to behave without prejudice, yet still possess hidden negative prejudice or stereotypes. Let's look at the Fremont City School student demographics and diversity. According to our website, the 2019-2020 profile, the total enrollment for Fremont City School students, pre-kindergarten through 12th, is 3,519 students. And of those, 72.4% are economically disadvantaged, 2.1% have limited English proficiency, 13.1% are students with disabilities, 0.4% are migrants, 60% have a college attendance rate, 2% military, 0.3% Pacific Islander or ethnicity, they're identified as Asian or Pacific Islanders, 8.9% African Americans, 24.7% Hispanic, 0.1% American Indian, 9.3% identify as multiracial, and 56.7% Caucasian. Now, if you remember, many of these categories were mentioned earlier in this discussion. Our biases and behavior. Studies have found, for example, that school teachers clearly telegraph biases, so much so that some researchers believe children of color and white children in the same classroom effectively receive different educations. How do our biases interfere with communication between teachers and their students, and teachers and parents, and our teachers and coworkers? How are we participating in biases or microaggressions? Some questions to think about. Do teachers or schools send subtle messages to students they convey low expectations? How can schools test themselves to make sure they're communicating high expectations? How do we create an environment of academic discourse? Teachers convey beliefs that learning is a serious endeavor, which may reward and demand, with many rewards and demands. Excuse me. Schools are becoming increasingly aware of the impact of unconscious bias. The impact can have on the student outcomes, but general awareness is not enough. To stop the impact of unconscious bias, we in schools must become aware of our personal biases and learn to take specific actions to overcome the impact it has on our students. To do this most effectively, we need to collaborate and support each other's growth, as well as support the administration that is committed to ongoing professional learning that effectively supports anti-bias practices. Communication of high expectations to our students. There are consistent messages from both the teacher and the entire school system that schools will help you succeed. We know that you can be successful. These are based upon genuine respect for students and believe that students are capable. High expectations influence teacher-student relationships and affect student performance, students' motivation, and their self-concept. Positive measures on the part of teachers and schools reflect the attitude and effective teaching in a multicultural society. Teachers understand student behavior in light of the norms of the communities in which they are raised and respect all students as learners with knowledge and experience. I thought this was an interesting description. Evelyn Carter, a social psychologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, describes bias as, bias is woven through cultures like a silver cord woven through cloth. In some lights, it's brightly visible. In others, it's hard to see and hard to distinguish. And your position relative to that glinting thread determines whether you see it at all. That's something to think about. If that is so deeply woven into our lives and into our construct, we can only see it in certain lights. And then there's some people that can't see it at all. What can we do to change? Let me offer a few strategies. First step is to turn a hidden bias into a visible one and acknowledge it is there. Recognize stereotypical thinking. Substitute assumptions and biases. Get to know and understand individuals. Explore new perspectives. Be open to increasing opportunity for positive contact. Continue learning and expand your knowledge of the cultures represented in your classroom and in your community. We do this by getting to know more deeply the cultures of your students as you cultivate your cultural sensitivity. Throughout this process, we become more aware and sensitive to one's backgrounds and needs. Be intentional. We can be intentional by creating classroom environments that reflect diversity and equality and equity. Engage families and communities in ways that are meaningful and culturally competent. Encourage students to speak out against bias and injustice. Support students' identities and making it safe for them to be fully themselves. Using instructional strategies that support diverse learning styles and allow for the development of critical thinking skills. Be intentional. Build and develop relationships with our students, their families, and the community. Search Institute, they're the creators of the 40 developmental assets. They have also identified 5 elements expressed in 20 specific actions that make relationships powerful in young people's lives. Those are known as the Developmental Relationships Framework. You can either look them up or take a moment to jot them down. They are: 1, express care. And under that category, show me that I matter to you by being dependable, be someone I can trust, listen, really pay attention when we are together, believe in me, make me feel known and valued, be warm, show me you enjoy being with me, encourage, praise me for my efforts and my achievements. And then number 2, challenge growth. Push me to keep getting better. Expect my best. Expect me to live up to my potential. Stretch. Push me to go further. Hold me accountable. Insist I take responsibility for my actions. Reflect on failures by helping me to learn from mistakes and setbacks. 3rd, provide support. Help me complete tasks and achieve goals. Navigate. Guide me through hard situations and systems. Empower. Build my confidence to take charge of my life. Advocate. Stand up for me when I need it. Set boundaries. Put in place limits that keep me on track. 4, share power. Treat me with respect and give me a say. Respect me. Take me seriously and treat me fairly. Include me. Involve me in decisions that affect me. Collaborate. Work with me to solve problems and reach goals. Let me lead. Create opportunities for me to take action and lead. And 5, expand possibilities. Connect me with people and places that broaden my world. Inspire me to be the best, to see the possibility of my future, to broaden my horizons, expose me to new ideas, experiences, and places. Connect me, introduce me to people who can help me grow. Authentic relationships are what we need. Good relationships, good classroom management, pure and simple. They bring awareness. Awareness can help overcome this unwanted influence, said Greenwald. Awareness can help us overcome the unwanted influence of implicit or explicit bias. Let's continue to work together on a solution. Be mindful of the behavior we're modeling both in our personal and professional lives. When students share their future aspirations, question yourself, do we persuade them or dissuade them? Having a positive perspective on parents and families of culturally and linguistically diverse parents. Reducing unconscious attitudes is not an easy task. It is a permanent, long-term, intentional process requiring your time and attention. The Harvard Institute has a test that you can take. It's personal, no one sees it but you, and it's called the Implicit Association Test. It's a tool that they have, and it gives you a couple of different categories which you can go on and click on. You answer quickly, your responses are quick, and it helps you to identify if there is any type of implicit bias or what it is. It's not if there is, what it is, because we all have it. We already know that. So if you have the time, take the time to go onto the University of Harvard University, and it's called the IAT, the Implicit Association Test. Thank you for your time.